coming into the rulemaking, but this is our fifth meeting of the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Middle Housing Oregon Homes. So we'll give another minute or so for folks to join. Welcome to those who have. We'll get going in 1 or 2 minutes. Morning, Sarah. Morning, Cheryl. Morning, Alexandra.
Good morning. On phone for now, dealing with some computer issues this morning.
Oh, those computers.
Yeah, on that note, my internet has been sort of intermittent, so I may drop out, but I'll try to hotspot back in if that happens.
Good. Thanks for a heads up. Any other computer issues? Any other moments of pain for this morning? Okay, everybody else looking good, feeling good. Let's jump right in. So good morning, everyone. Again, welcome to the Middle Housing Oregon Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting number 5. As I have been across this process, Ben Duncan with Kearns and West, your facilitator. I'm going to dive right in. We got a pretty open discussion today, but a lot to cover, and want to make sure that we're maximizing the time for you all as rulemaking advisory members to have plenty of space and time for discussion. As a reminder, this is a Zoom live streamed meeting. It is being recorded. We do have closed captions available for if it's helpful for your participation. You can click the More button and show captions, or if you have a CC button, closed captioning, if you click that, it'll bring captioning up, if that's helpful for your participation and tracking of the meeting today. We do always ask RAC members to keep your cameras on as much as possible, create the spirit of being in community in the room, and also for some public transparency, and just to see your wonderful, beautiful faces all day. We'll ask folks, particularly RAC members, if you could update your name to include name and affiliation. That'll be really helpful. As a reminder, if you hover over your own image or your box, click on the 3 dots at the top of your image, and then click rename. You can rename yourself with your name and affiliation. And finally, we encourage you not to use chat for substantive comment, but for technical issues. So if you're having any technical challenges, feel free to use the chat. We'll work on the back end to try to help you out. But the public on live stream cannot see the chat, so we want to make sure that anything that's substantive is brought into the space. If you go next slide. As a reminder, and it's been a real joy to watch you all as a group navigate this, so I'll be really quickly with these group guidelines, because you all have done this incredibly well throughout our time together. We have some very specific topics and some more broad conversation today. Hopefully folks have had ongoing chance to kind of track the content that we'll be talking about and creating space for. We'll balance speaking times. So again, with the times you might invite particular interest-based perspectives to start a conversation, or that might have more relevance or implication for particular parts of the conversation, but just pay attention to how much or how little you're speaking, listening to each other, trying to understand, being respectful, constructive. If I said anytime you all are finding alignment and agreement, it's a gift to the agencies as they're trying to draft rules. To address questions and issues and not people and organizations, finding common ground. And then, obviously we're moving towards, we have some more space after this meeting. It's not the last time for this discussion, but, as early as you can name things that are of concern or that you'd like to bring into the space, that's really helpful. So please do not wait for our July meeting to name things that may be of concern for you. If you go to the next slide. So is this me or Ethan? Do I pass this to you? I forgot. I think it's me. I'll keep going. So how we're going to move through this conversation at the end of today, we're hoping to have a robust conversation on programmatic interpretation that should help inform the conversation and understand kind of how that interpretation relates to the work that you all do and engage in. And then we'll have a really focused conversation on some of the draft rules, particularly Division 46 cottage cluster definition and the version 2 revisions for Division 47. We also, and hopefully folks had a chance to review in your packet, the impact statements, we'll spend some time reviewing those draft impact statements, getting your feedback on those. If you go to the next slide, in order to accomplish those desired outcomes, our agenda will create space as we do for every meeting to have a bit of time to reflect back on meeting 4 if there's anything that's come up or additional thoughts that you've had based on that conversation. We'll create some space there. We'll have a relatively short conversation, we hope, for Division 46 cottage cluster definition. And then we have a pretty substantive amount of time for the Oregon Homes programmatic interpretation. So there'll be a bit of an overview and then space for discussion. We'll build a break-in, move into version 2 revisions for the draft rules, and then a relatively short period of time to get any key feedback on the rulemaking impact statements. We'll reflect on the timeline, next steps, and get you out of here by noon. So that's the hope for today. With that, I'm going to move into our roll call for RAC members. I'll go just in the order of what you see on your screen. Alexandra.
Here.
Thank you. Andy.
Present.
Thank you. Annika. See Annika? No, don't see Annika. Brandon.
Present.
Thank you. Brock.
Here.
Thank you. Catherine.
Here.
Thank you. Cheryl.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here.
Thank you. Destin. Diego. I think Eric's going to miss today. Elsa. Don't see Elsa. Fred.
Here.
Thank you, Fred. Jerica. Let's see, Jerica. Jerry.
I'm here.
Thank you, Jerry. Jill.
Here.
Thank you, Jill. Jim Taylor.
Present.
Thank you, Jim. Jonathan. Nora. Lee. Mary Kyle let us know that she'd be running a little bit late, so we'll keep an eye out for her. Mark Taylor. Morgan.
Here.
Shane, I think, is going to miss today. Sarah.
Good morning, here.
Thank you. And Samantha. Okay, did anybody come in after I move through the alphabetical list here? Doesn't look like it. Let's keep going. So I'm going to be really brief. Again, you've heard me kind of reflect on this at every meeting as a reflection of our first conversation as a group. So just as a reminder, we're really committed to using the racial equity framework for decision-making that looks at historical inequities, benefits and burdens, data equity and data justice, community engagement and empowerment, and then relationships to decision-making, including restorative justice, outcomes, accountability, and measured outcomes and continuous improvement. If you go to the next slide, just as a quick reminder of some of the things you all named in one of our earlier meetings. We go next slide. Slowly but surely. So for historical inequities, just recognizing communities that have been excluded from housing access and understanding barriers and delays, as well as NIMBYism, not in my backyard. More housing production for benefits and burdens, so they can reduce costs, improve access. You'll see some of this reflected in the racial impact statement that we'll talk about later. Siting and design and understanding the impacts that can have on community safety, community well-being. Data equity, data justice, recognize communities of color, communities with disabilities, LGBTQ+ communities are disproportionately housing insecure. And then you all named some of the identified needs for communities, including multifamily housing, accessibility, fair housing, community and cooperative models, and livability. So again, just grounding us and reminding us of the conversation we had earlier, but also an ongoing opportunity to try to embed some of these considerations in our discussion. So with that, I want to move in and open up some space. Looks like Samantha, welcome. I think you joined after we did our roll call. Good to see you. So for meeting 4, I just wanted to create some space. I'll first just, if you go to the next slide, just reflect on some of the key themes that came up in our last meeting. One, just a lot of discussion around the challenges of applying a statewide approach in geographies and jurisdictions that really are different geographically, from an infrastructure, from community needs. And you all really worked to try to find this balance between statewide approach and standardization, with a recognition of that overlay with local codes, local needs, and local contexts. Talked a lot about clarity instead of broad standards, and that the current broadness of standards could make the program complicated. It could risk inconsistent application. You've mentioned things like tiered standards based on jurisdictional size or location. And then you talked about the Oregon home in relationship to the Oregon lot, and that the lot itself and the home can be considered as two distinct elements, and deferring some of those siting decisions to local jurisdictions while also trying to standardize home design itself seems the most clear and workable path. So just some high-level themes to reground us. Did want to open it up if there's some further reflections, thoughts, or anything folks would like to add from the last meeting before we move into today's conversation. Okay, not seeing any. Let's dive right in. So we're going to have our first conversation will be focused on the Division 46 cottage cluster definition. So we have a DLC. You want to go to the next slide? We'll pull up the language, but Becky, you want to talk about it? Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Just a reminder, my name is Becky Catino, she, her pronouns. I'm a housing planner at DLCD. And what's on the screen now are the draft definitions for cottage cluster. And then just a reminder, so this is part of the MH of our more rulemaking charge, the middle housing, HB 2138. There's lots there that's going to be part of phase 2, but as part of phase 1, we're creating the updated definition of cottage cluster in HB 2138. It's task rulemaking to incorporate the term small footprint or floor area and to define that. So that's what you see on the screen. It's really those 1 or I 1, 2, 3. That is kind of the unique what we've added here for this definition. So this, very short definition, but I will ask Ethan if you want to add anything and then open it up to the floor for discussion more generally.
Sure. Thanks, Becky. And hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Ethan Stuckmeyer. I manage the housing division here at DLCD. Yeah, just echoing some of the things that Becky queued up for us today. You'll notice in the actual construction of the rules, I'll speak a little bit to the specifics. So the first pieces, the little a, little b, little c, come from statute. There's a definition provided in HB 2138. The piece that we're adding, or I would say is up for discussion on whether we hit the mark or not, is on capital A, single I, double I, triple I. So that's really where the discussion today, I hope, can be focused, really, because A, B, and C are generally already defined for us. So we took the conversation from, I think that was meeting either 2 or 3, I honestly can't remember, maybe 3, when we queued up the cottage cluster discussion. One of the prevailing thoughts, at least from the conversation that we had at that meeting, was the idea of a small footprint being not specific to any individual unit on that lot, but instead kind of using like an average approach, saying generally the units within a cottage cluster are going to be smaller or of a certain size that would be qualifying as small. And so we took cues from other places within the middle housing standards and landed on kind of an average square footage of 1,400 square feet per unit, which allows for that unit size diversity. That's really kind of like the core element of this particular change in statute. We also had some discussion around, well, when does that actually apply? And what happens in a redevelopment scenario? Does that same cap at 1,400 square feet apply? And we added some language here, as you can see in triple I, to say, no, that only applies at the time of initial development. So that's some of the background and the rationale and how we found ourselves here, but happy to entertain discussion, feedback, questions on any of those items.
All right, thanks, Becky. Thanks, Ethan. I see a floating thumbs up at my screen. Thanks, Brock. Any questions for clarity or comments, concerns, discussion? Yeah, Cheryl.
Good morning. And I'm just calling this out just so that I understand. It says, the square footage is calculated at the time of initial development. And I appreciate the clarity because that's always really helpful. But does that mean essentially then they could come back after the initial development, add on a bunch of square footage and then basically turn it into a much larger development? Would it fall out of cottage cluster at that time? Because I think that's where some of my staff have been a little bit confused on how they're so new. We haven't seen redevelopment of these, but we anticipate somebody might in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. And I think, that was one of those questions that was pondered. I think it was meeting 3. I'm just going to run with meeting 3. And about, okay, what happens in that kind of redevelopment scenario? And I think there's generally, there are some other standards, or at least the regulatory framework around middle housing would serve to mitigate against some of that. So you don't have this like much larger development that can all of a sudden happen on a cottage cluster unit, because it still has to, at the end of the day, meet the other cottage cluster standards that are present within the jurisdiction. But this technically would allow that kind of situation to happen, Cheryl, but for the local government standards.
Okay, well, that makes sense too. I mean, you have to keep some of the open area for cottage cluster, and at some point you're going to start to hit some building code issues as well. So,
right.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Let's go Morgan, then Jill.
2 comments. One is kind of and you probably don't have the flexibility to make this change, but in reviewing the sentence about detached or attached and subgrouping it up to 4, I think there's a potential that you could misread that as being detached in subgroupings of up to 4 units, basically limiting you to 4 detached units. I don't know that that's a real pressing issue, but if there's flexibility, I was going to suggest considering switching the order to avoid reading it that way, to say that they're attached in subgroupings of up to 4 units or detached in any configuration. But that's kind of a minor thing. I think a more challenging or concerning issue with this is the introduction of excluding garage area from the 1,400 square feet. I think it may be fine for local jurisdiction to apply that if you want to make that sort of a local application, but requiring us to exclude garages basically is incentivizing garages, making the units bigger and more expensive, prioritizing parking over people. So I don't think that's policy-wise, I don't think that's a great move, but I could see that jurisdictions may want to encourage more flexibility to accommodate garages. I don't think that should be part of our mandated order.
Okay, thanks, Morgan. Jill, and then Jerry.
I had the same concern that Morgan did about the subgroupings of 4. I see now I read it totally the wrong way and was like, wait, only 4 units? That's not right. So I think just clarity of language would be helpful so people don't freak out. I also have concern about not including garages. I wonder if there's an in-between option because I know some of the so City of Portland does include garages in the floor area ratio. Some of the suburban areas, I don't know how they say it, but it's kind of like it's sort of counted, but then you get more floor area if you have a garage. So there's sort of like an in-between way of allowing that. And then the last thing is I just want to point out, so there's no longer a footprint maximum. So basically just having the 1,400 square footage means you could potentially have a footprint of a building that's 1,400 square feet.
Or even
If I'm
larger. Yeah, or even larger because it's an average of the units on the site. So
right.
you could
And
have a few yeah.
I don't know if that's automatically bad, but I think we need to think through, is that what you would want? Yeah, so that's all. I mean, I think that having a larger footprint is good for if you're really trying to make a truly accessible unit. That's where that would really be beneficial. But I just have concerns that maybe 1,400 footprint would be too big for the spirit of a cottage cluster. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. And I know, Ethan, you had talked about some of the previous conversations that led to trying to have that average. So, Jill, I appreciate you naming it and in the context of some of our discussions. Jerry and then Fred.
I agree with the concerns about size of the footprint and then the use of an average, because according to my calculations, if you had 6 units in a cottage cluster and 4 of them were at 800 square feet, which is what I would consider a cottage, you could then have 2 of them at 2,600 square feet, which does not sound to me like it would comply with that, and each have a small footprint or floor area. So we have this tension between a standard that applies to each unit and the average size. And I think those are in tension here unless we put a cap on what the maximum size might be. So in a way, that'd be a definition of what is a small footprint or floor area. Thank you. Oh, and I agree with the concerns about the garage, because for many people, the garage is not where you put your car, it's where you put your extra stuff. So it amounts to being part of the house. So I think considering half of the square footage of the garage or something like that would be helpful. Thank you.
Jerry, just really quick, I mean, did you have a number in mind when you said a cap? Like, I get your point, but like, is there a number that you would put at the table?
To me, a cottage, 1,400 or 1,500 square foot should be the maximum. I mean, once you get much above that, you get to, at least for me, it's kind of a small, is a house, but it's not. At least when I lived in a cottage cluster many years ago, the larger units, which were quite comfortable, were at maybe 800-900 square feet.
Good.
That's the cottage part to me. So
yeah, just asking the question just to put it in the room. Thank you. Let's go Fred, then Samantha, then Alexandra, then Brock. Well, Brock, I think you came up and down, but that's all right. We'll put you back in the queue. Fred, jump in.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that Jerry just said. I think that all makes good sense. I think that all the other points are very good points as well. I guess I did have the same concern about including garages in the footprint, especially with no limit on the size of a garage. So I think the model code exempts out like 200 square feet of a garage, which is essentially a 1-car garage, which would make some sense to me. I think not including the upper cap doesn't make any sense. The other thing that I would say is I would define what a porch is. Is a porch enclosed or not enclosed? It's not clear to me what exactly a porch is based on that language. So that's what I have.
Ethan?
Yeah, that's helpful. And I'll just say the intent is like behind the private front door is kind of what we're envisioning there.
Is porch defined somewhere else?
Not in Division 46, no.
Okay. Thanks, Fred. Samantha?
Yeah, so I didn't mean to do a thumbs up earlier. So if for the record, I wasn't thumbs upping. I was just trying to raise my hand. I will tell you, my folks are very happy with this definition as it is drafted. And those are the folks that are building a lot of the cottage clusters. And so we would not want to see much change. And I definitely don't think we would support any sort of a cap. I don't think it's necessary. And we also are good with the garages and porches being excluded. I would say I understand that folks are kind of getting wrapped around the axle around cottage clusters because the word cottage implies that it's like a small unit, but that's not the legal characteristic of a middle housing unit. That's not relevant. And so we have folks that are building middle housing, are building cottage clusters. The current definition of 900 square feet is way too small. There's nothing marketable there. And so they were very happy to see this definition, and we would support it.
All right. Thanks, Samantha. Alexandra?
Just some concerns around the conflict between small footprint area, the 1,400 square foot average, and then additionally porches and garages, just the three together do not seem to actually create any kind of cohesion. I don't really, not a planner, don't have a strong preference on how you fix that cohesion issue. But clearly in order to make this like actual implementable rules that meet clear and objective, not objectable standards for local government, some additional clarity there is needed. Also, Ethan, I think you mean in front of the private entrance? Because you said behind, and that would imply that the porch is interior to the home rather than exterior to the home.
Right. I meant the calculation of footprint is behind them. That's what I meant. So yeah, thank you for helping me clarify. Yes.
Thank you. I was confused there for a second that we were talking about like sunrooms. That's all I got for you.
Sunrooms don't show up. I don't believe in these. Brock, jump in.
Yeah, 100% agree with what Sam said, as I've mentioned in previous meetings, of having that 1,400 square foot average and one home's a little bigger helps the project pencil. You either get no units or you get a few. That's what we're here to do. We're here to make sure that housing gets built. I don't see any reason why we would make it harder to do so.
All right. Thank you, Brock. I'm not seeing any other hands. Ethan or Becky, any follow-up questions for folks?
I actually had one for Samantha or Brock. You kind of mentioned a cap would not be useful, and I just kind of would be curious to hear a little bit more on that.
So let's say that with your overall development costs for 900 square foot units is not able to pencil, the project would cost more than you would make off being able to sell those units for. Having a larger unit, so say, 3 1,200 square foot units and one 1,800 square foot unit or whatever the number is there, and that does pencil, that enables the development. If we cap it at 900, then it doesn't work all the time. It's allowing a flexibility while still saying on the whole, when you're doing a development like this, make sure that we're not building 5,000 square foot homes.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, for me, I agree with Brock. It's about adding flexibility and not being overly prescriptive because we're trying to enable more middle housing to be built. And so if you get overly prescriptive, you risk things not working, and units just not being constructed. And so I appreciated how we wrote it as an average, because I thought that provided flexibility where it's due. I know we're focusing on like the words small footprint because that what was written in the bill. But if we get too bogged down on trying to make these tiny and too small, we run into the issue that the actual home builders are dealing with right now, who are trying to build these units, which is that the actual market, the people that want to buy them, don't want them to be that small.
Thanks, Samantha. Yeah,
Thank
Becky,
you both.
anything else? Yeah, Jill?
I consider myself also representing home builders, and I appreciate that the real estate advocates here in the group have a point of view, but I want to make sure that we're also building housing that is creating good neighborhoods. So to say kind of wholesale that they don't pencil at 900 square feet footprint is just not true because they're already being built. And so I appreciate your opinion. I think it's important for you to bring it up, but it's not every situation where they're not penciling it the way they are now. I know it looks like Brock wants to defend.
Well, that's
what I
fair,
just
Jill. And
said.
I just to say, I think what I heard is the flexibility was what was really
Yeah.
beneficial. So like, but Brock said
Agreed.
that-
I think that
yeah.
that's a really valid point.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. That in some instances, 900 per unit very well may pencil perfectly. In some, it might not. So for the ones where it doesn't make sense to cap that flexibility.
Yeah, thanks for that. Morgan?
Probably belaboring the point, but yeah, I think I support what Jill said. And I appreciate what Brock and Sam are bringing up. I think flexibility is important. We've incorporated that into Portland's code. There's some very, you can average some certain things. And I think that provides for that unit diversity within the development. I think when others were suggesting a unit size cap, I don't think we need to get overly prescriptive, but I think the concern is, middle housing does have a particular objective, and it's not just a numbers game. It's a quality and who benefits from the housing that's being built, and it integrates well into the neighborhood. So that's part of the underlying theme there of middle housing. So when we're talking about an oversized cap or oversized limit, a limit on oversized structures, I should say, it's just something I think DLCD staff should consider in the rules. And rather than trying to hammer out what that number is, I think it's just, we've made the point, consider it in the future revisions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan. That's a good way to maybe conclude that part of the agenda. DLCD got the feedback that I think you were seeking for that section. So let's keep moving. Becky, I'm gonna, this will be a little different than we've kind of done some of the other meetings, but we're gonna have a bit of a presentation and then lead into a discussion. So Becky, I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, so to kind of cue this up, we've had discussion in the last RAC meeting, kind of talking about different ways you can interpret the bill. And we have clarity on that to share from the state. It kind of took us a while to get there, and that is a little bit of why the packet came out later. So just want to acknowledge that we didn't give you all that full week to review draft rules. But before we get into draft rules, we really just want to highlight how we envision the Oregon Homes program functioning and how a development could move through the process. So I'm going to run through these slides. If you could hold questions till the end, but obviously if something's really burning, put it in the chat, raise your hand. I won't not hear you. And then after I run through the slides, I'll ask any state staff to jump in and kind of add clarification. So with that, next slide. All right, so the first portion of Oregon Homes, you have to find that lot or that parcel that fits the requirements that have been outlined within the bill. So that's what you see on the screen. Lot within a UGB boundary, zoned residential, at least 1,500 square feet, not larger than 20,000 square feet, not covered in slopes more than a 15% average, and then not inventoried as environmentally sensitive, open space, or naturally hazard area, which we have added some clarification there in terms of, say, the buildable area of the development is wholly outside, then that could be eligible. So we did add some details there. And then the lot also has to be vacant. There's some, you can see there in that long box. I'm not going to read that all out because that's in the bill for you all, but there are, qualifications there. So those are what a lot would have to be eligible for the program. Next slide. So this is a diagram Ethan actually put together of example parcels. That one's too large. This one's zoned residential. The two in the left top have that environmentally sensitive area, so you couldn't build there. The lot next to it is developed, so can't be building. But then those two lots that have green, those meet the qualifications, so you could develop on those lots. Next slide. And then another visualization kind of addressing here the tree standards. If you have, a tree that could not be removed, you would have to, that wouldn't be eligible. And then also calling out in the rules that the minimum residential density has to be met. So that's another qualification for an Oregon Homes lot. And so if that minimum density requirement is met and all of the other standards in Division 47, the siding standards, design standards, and the tree standards are met, then you could develop on that lot. Next slide. All right, so that is the lot or parcel side, but then this is the building structure itself and the building code review. So you see here these three options, these three pathways to approval. So option one is using the BCD permit ready plans. Those plans are being developed right now by the state. And that second box underneath option one is just calling out that there are some limitations of what those pre-approved plans can be under the permit ready plan program. For option two, it's still using a state pre-approved, the BCD program, the master plan review program that is through, developer or project sponsor of a project will submit a plan, and then that gets pre-approved and can be taken anywhere in the state to be developed. And then that second box there is just calling out that these plans remain proprietary for the developer unless they would like to make that public. And then option three is what we're really calling attention here today, and kind of what this is this third pathway that a developer could just submit building plans through the local jurisdiction, the local government's building plan review process. So there's no state building plan pre-approval with this third pathway. Next slide. So calling out here what I was just laying out, that so you have an eligible lot, you have a building pre-approval either through the master plan review program or the permit ready program. You're still going to have your land use compliance check using the Oregon Homes parameters. So that's called out in that top right box of the siding design standards and tree standards. And then you're also still by statute able to review for the local government's public facilities plans, final engineering plans, and traffic impact analysis for that lot. And you do still have to have a shortened local building plan review, but again, it's going to be faster in that the building plan reviewer is just making sure that the building plan matches what the pre-approved plans are and that the site conditions would allow for the use of that pre-approved plan. Next slide. So then the third pathway, so you have your eligible lot and you have a preliminary building that meets the requirements of the bill. You're still having the local land use check the standards in Division 47 and the additional local review that you're allowed, but then it's the traditional local building review process. So next slide. I think this is the last one. All right, so yeah, this is outlined in the bill what the criteria of an Oregon Homes structure is. So a detached housing, including accessory dwelling units or prefabricated modular housing. And then those have to have not more than a 2,200 square feet per dwelling unit per all of those housing types. And then for cottage clusters, average per unit size of not more than 1,400 square feet. And then dwelling unit structures have to have more than 6, but fewer than 12 units. Next slide. All right, so there it is laid out. I'll ask state employees to jump in with any additions or clarifications to that before we open broadly.
Thanks, Becky. Ethan?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, there's that state pre-approval that we've been talking about as part of these meetings with you all, and the local approval as well. So that would include a situation where a builder is bringing one of those qualifying housing types to the local government. It does not have state approval, but it meets these criteria outlined in HB 2258. And therefore that builder can say, hey, I would like this application to be reviewed under the Oregon Homes program, which then the local government is not reviewing against its own development standards. It's reviewing against the state's Oregon Home standards. So I just wanted to highlight those options. I know that was a source of discussion in the last meeting. So happy to discuss further with folks.
All right, thank you. So let's open it up. Comments, questions, concerns. Sarah?
Thank you, Ben. This may have been addressed before, so if it has, I apologize. So in the slide that Becky had, it was the first one in this section where it talked about that the property cannot have an average slope greater than 15%. But then in looking at the development checklist that was given to us before this meeting, it also states not inventoried as an environmentally sensitive area, open space, or in a natural hazard area. So does that mean that if it's in a mapped geologic hazard area, so it's got map landslide topography, whatever that is from Dagami, that it doesn't matter what the slope is? Like, how do those align? And I'm assuming that also means no flood as a natural, because I'm putting my goal 7 hat on. But what does that mean for the slope and mapped areas of geologic hazard?
I believe I might ask you to restate that question more just again, because I think the answer to the question is yes, but I just want to make sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let me rephrase it a different way. If a property is in a mapped area of geologic hazard, going back to the Dagami bulletins or maps, then it wouldn't be eligible regardless of slope.
My understanding is yes, that's an accurate statement.
Okay, thank you.
Samantha, I thought I saw your hand, and welcome, Mary Kyle.
I just wanted to co-sign that I was also confused about what Sarah had mentioned, and I appreciate the clarity there.
Great, thank you. Morgan.
Okay. I've got to get a few things on the record as you've asked us to do. I'm very concerned about a number of the interpretations. I'm not sure where the direction is coming from. It seems a little bit of fiction when you cross-reference it to the bill. So this third local option doesn't sound like a pre-approved program. It sounds like a end run around local zoning. It also sounds like a shift of the program administrative burden from the state to local jurisdictions. And I don't think that was the intent of the bill. I don't think it's consistent with the bill. Additionally, the provision that allows areas of lots to be carved out if they're deemed unconstrained by natural hazards is not supported by the language of the bill. And given the fact that we have to review these in a clear and objective ministerial manner, makes that very difficult to achieve. There are mapped hazards, yeah. But if you go into the Dogami maps, there's a lot of data to sift through. It's not necessarily a binary yes/no kind of answer. And typically, we answer those questions through geologic hazard studies and so forth. So not clear and objective. So I'm just going to stop there, just put that on the record. We get more discussions about it. I think this might come back up in our discussion of the draft rules. Thanks.
Thank you, Morgan. Alexandra?
Absolutely no disagreement with Morgan. Anything he said. Option 3 is not what this bill conceived of in any way, shape, or form. As one of the lobbyists who negotiated this bill, that was not the clear intent of this bill at the time that the legislature passed it. If we have to go back to the legislature, we can, but we would prefer not to have to go around the agency to get the original legislative intent implemented. So the removal of option 3 is vital to us not having to go back to the legislature to ensure the original intent is followed. Additionally, it was not envisioned that natural hazards were carved out. Those lots are simply not eligible because of the additional review needed at the local government level for any kind of natural hazard that is not compatible with the intent of this program, which is the elimination or limitation of local government review. If you're actually trying to make this an easier, simpler, faster process, that is not what you are doing. I know that does limit the number of lots that this applies to, but really this is not going to create anything but frustration for the developers and for the local governments who are implementing it.
Thanks, Alexandra. Samantha?
I'll just say I don't know on the natural hazard piece if we have a different opinion than the cities. I will say this is definitely an issue we should be having more conversation on, because in the sorry, my son's in the background yelling about Lightning McQueen. My apologies. I think that when this bill was adopted, I don't think from at least my organization's perspective that we thought there would be any special treatment given or waiver or carving out of any sort of like safety regulations, especially as it comes to natural hazards. So that's something I hearing the feedback of the cities makes me feel a bit concerned about that. I have a question on a separate issue, though. It's in section 8 of, and I don't know if this is timely to bring that up now or if we're going to get to that later in the day.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm on section 8 of 660-047-0020 of the local review process.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get to that. Sam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Lost
no,
on where we are in the agenda.
all right, thank you. Fred?
Yeah, I guess my primary concern with all of this is, you know, like when I heard about this program, I didn't conceive it as sort of zoning reform. And I really see that what the likely outcome of this is completely circumventing local zoning authority. And I mean, just a couple of examples I've stated before. We have a number of lots that are going to classify under this program. We have a ton of infill lots in the community right now. Under current state law, we only have to allow a duplex on a lot of those that are zoned for single family houses. This would increase that by 6 times, right? Potentially a 12 unit complex. Also, we do not have to do or we're allowed to have parking requirements. This would circumvent our parking requirements as well. This, when I heard it, was not sold as a zoning reform bill. This was sold as a bill for permit-ready plans, is sort of how I understood it. And this seems to me, in its current iteration, to be much more zoning reform.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll come back for, let's go Brandon, and then, Fred, I think you kind of opened up by talking about some of the implications. So we're certainly hearing from some folks around kind of how this is interpreted. I'll just use the language, seems problematic, right, from what I've just heard. But I think, Fred, what you just opened up was like, what are some of the implications and outcomes of this interpretation at the local level? So Brandon, let's Ethan, did you want to jump in first?
Sorry, Brandon, I apologize. I think in addition to that, Ben, I'd also be curious to hear from folks on changes to the rules that might be necessary to offset or mitigate or try to, make the program work better with that. So
Yeah, thank you.
implications, but also, areas where we can overcome some of those.
That's great. Yes, both and appreciate that. Brandon?
Thanks. First, I think also as one of the lobbyists who worked 2258 during session, I'm going to have to agree with Alexandra and my friends at the League of Oregon Cities. The natural hazard areas, floodplain, landslide zone, that language there was included specifically to exclude them from the slate. So apologies to the home builders and folks who might think otherwise, but that is as someone who worked that section specifically, wanted to just put my agreement with LOC there on the record. And then this might dovetail into what Fred brought up there a second ago, but I am struggling, frankly, with some of the rules that are being presented here for frankly the section 2 sub 5 where the commission may specify. I haven't heard the commission tell us that they want it specified. And so a lot of these potential rules, right? Floor to area ratios, minimum dwelling, units per acre, maximum setbacks, parking, etc. Unless LCDC tells the agency to write the rules to address those concerns, I don't know why you're mandating the local governments to do these things. And I would agree with Fred that it sounds like, or my apologies, I think it was Morgan who brought it up first, a runaround on the local governments, and I just need to get that on the record. So I don't think the rules as drafted are in line with what the language of the bill says. Then I'll stop there.
Good. And there may be specific examples, Brandon, to come back to and continue to name around where there's that conflict with the rules and intent. Thank you. Alexandra?
What Brandon just said, I think, where we're coming into the most conflict is those optional portions. Like it legitimately, we've had this conversation before. We're going to have it again today, apparently. It makes no sense to create statewide regulations when the rest of our land use regulations do not apply in a statewide manner in this way. Like we do not have a statewide prohibition on parking for all housing types because it doesn't match what is available and realistic on the ground in all of our jurisdictions. Like you cannot say in a small town that you can build something with no off-street parking. They're likely not to have on-street parking. They're likely not to have other resources. And we're just saying that essentially, for lower income households that are trying to get into their first home ownership opportunity. They do not get the option to have a car to get to their jobs. That is not something that is conceived of in the rest of our land use system. Like we are moving away from cars, but we do not have a rule that says all jurisdictions statewide, no cars, no parking. Really, how this bill is working, it's just really in implementation, not reflective of what's on the ground. Like I get that there is this desire to make, a cohesive system, but the reality is we don't have cohesive communities across Oregon, and the continued lack of reflection upon that is really what makes these rules kind of impossible for our cities to implement well, and impossible to make good developments on the ground at the end of the day. Because you can say, we're gonna, write these rules as if they apply to, large cities only, but the reality is you're scooping up your Independences, you're scooping up your Tillamook's, you're scooping up your smaller cities that this just does not make sense in. And Ethan, I know you and I have had the conversation of like, you can't do it by city size, then don't do it by city size. Gear this as if you're writing this for smaller cities, because the reality is this is not going to apply to a lot of lots in the city of Portland. This is going to apply to some lots in the city of Portland, but the reality is you're going to see this happen a lot more in areas where you have a lot of flatter lots. And those are not the city of Portland. Those are your smaller cities. Those are your cities that have had recent expansion areas.
Thanks, Alexandra. Sarah?
Thank you. So I echo all of the things that have just been said, but I have two more points to go with that. The first one is, going through right now, HCA and an HNA and walking into a housing production strategy plan, what I see as these rules are like tools in the toolbox that can be optional for cities and others to implement them as housing production strategies if we are unable to meet our housing production goals. So these to me could be that roadmap of those options to add later where they need to be added and where it's appropriate. The other thing with that is in thinking about this and thinking about public works departments and others, the one piece of the conversation that I was reflecting on the last couple of days that I think has been missed is where are the fire departments and the state fire marshal's office in this? And the reason why I ask that is because when we start really shrinking setbacks, and I know building codes will address that to some degree with firewalls, there's fire hardening standards, etc. But one of the things that I'm still concerned about is accessibility between buildings for emergency response. The other thing is when you look at some cities and some areas, they have improved road surfaces that go out 30, 40, 50 feet. They have sidewalks. You may not need a front yard setback because you've got adequate area for a fire truck to set up in the event of a fire or a response. When you look at some of these smaller cities, or even in some of the larger cities, the fire trucks and the people oftentimes go into and utilize that space in that front yard setback for emergency response, right? It's not just about open space and aesthetics. I will tell you personally, all of the time, I see those front yard spaces utilized for that reason. And even looking at things like a variance proposal to reduce a front yard setback or, something of that nature, the first people I reach out to are the fire department, because in the event of an emergency, that's their space. That becomes their area, which is why it is so critical to have those areas preserved. And so if we have not invited the fire marshal's office and some of our fire departments into this conversation, we really need to before we start looking at setback adjustments. I would say at a local level, just to echo some of that stuff, we've all set our setbacks with the intent of understanding the needs of our fire departments and where they need to go so they also can provide services for public health, welfare, and safety. And if we start monkeying with that and adjusting that arbitrarily without their input, we could be putting people in danger. And I don't want to be like Chicken Little, the sky is falling, but we haven't talked about that part. And that's a huge piece of this conversation. So thank you.
Yes, sir. So Ethan, I mean, maybe there's a point in this conversation for now, and I know setbacks is a particular area of focus for later in the agenda, but did you want to add any reflection or comment, Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, both. We can touch on it now and when we get to those particular sections. But I think one of the things that I'll just highlight is that when we're talking about the land use standards, I recognize the connection to those standards and the rationale or the reason why those are developed and adopted at the local government level for all the reasons that Sarah and others have identified here. But I actually don't, the Oregon Homes Program would not prevent a local government from still ensuring that those kind of things, those safety measures are present through the application of or the review of the final engineering plans and public facilities, and I guess traffic impacts assessments are kind of an aside here. But when it comes to fire codes and things like that, I'm just over my skis. So Andy, if you're in the room here and are interested in weighing in on those kind of things, especially around our state interpretation here on these options.
I'm in the room, but I'm also not really qualified to talk about fire codes. Sorry.
Well, let's come back to this, Sarah. So we're gonna come back to the setback language later in the conversation, and again, I think Ethan, where you push the group is, we can have kind of the I don't know if this is a fair way to say it, the kind of political conversation around interpretation, but also like, are there areas and rules that can mitigate for some of those concerns? From a rulemaking and rule writing standpoint. Let's go Samantha, then Cheryl, and then maybe we'll come full circle back to you, Morgan, because you started this conversation, just to see if you're hearing things or come back into some of the rule discussion. Are there areas in the rule that we could focus on? Samantha?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, what Sarah highlighted is a policy issue that we're dealing with kind of across the land use space right now, is there's sort of an inherent conflict between the increasing of density and fire life safety. And it's something that in my organization doesn't even have our arms fully around, but I just want to flag it as something we should be thoughtful about in our conversations. But one thing I just want to flag for Ethan is your land use approval is normally going to be conditioned upon you meeting all the fire life safety requirements. So it really is a part of that front end analysis. And so we should be endeavoring to make sure that there is no conflict there, especially for our smaller cities where maybe your planner is also doing your building code review. And there's a lot of cross sharing of responsibilities. And so again, I don't really know where HBA lands one way or another on anything. We don't want to sacrifice or advocate against safety regulation. I know that for sure, but this is something that is complex, and I just hope we can really take our time to get it right.
Thanks, Samantha. Cheryl?
Yeah, I appreciate all the comments. This is good discussion. I guess in sticking with kind of the overarching theme of like comments to fix the rules, and then also specifically on the building issues. I think it's been, obviously, I think all of us, we've talked about it a lot because it was really unclear in the intent, between the intent of the bill during the session and the language that got finally adopted. And I think we all thought it was a pre-approved plans. I know that's a legislative change, but I think that may be something that needs to be explored, because I really believe originally it was a pre-approved plan on a pre-approved lot. And that may get us more of what the bill is actually intending. I want to echo what Brandon said from AOC. Some of these things all in the bill say may. It's not required. And if we could go back to just it referring to the local zoning and development ordinance, it would address things like setbacks and access. The rural setbacks we've got are very different than the city of Portland. What we can do in Portland, we can't do in Clackamas County. You know, it would address some things we can do in the county that we can't do in Portland, and we're more permissive. It would let us have that ability to make sure we're giving our customers the biggest amount of options. Because I think I've expressed, I think this will actually be more restrictive than what we currently do now. So it goes both directions, but I think if we didn't, some of these are optional, and we spent a lot of time at the local level trying to get our land use right. We all have to be spurring development. We all have to be building housing. None of us are trying to get in the way of that. And I think that may be, some of these optional things just may not be options we need to explore at this time.
Thanks, Cheryl. So I guess, Morgan, I know I put you on the spot and now you're on off mute. So I guess I wanted to go back to Ethan's comment, right, around like, are there things in the rules, right? If the interpretation, and clearly I think you all, many of you have expressed some concern with that just in and of itself. I guess I'm curious if there's spaces in the rules that are connected to that conversation that should shift, or that you would offer feedback on. But Morgan, I know I called you out because you started us off, so I'm circling back to you.
Appreciate that. I think there's a lot more to be said about the rules, but I think that's part of our later part of the agenda. So I don't really want to dive deep into that just yet. But I think the comments so far from the RAC have been on point. I agree with just about everything everyone has said. I especially like highlighting the fact that we're not obligated to address all of the things that are optional in the bill. So I think there's a beacon of light there. I go back to my previous comment from last month, which was maybe we just focus on getting the structure and leave the local siting standards to the local governments. And maybe there's some concerns that can be addressed around a little bit of flexibility within those variance provisions. But I don't think we need to just, it's more of a scalpel, not a butcher knife. The issue that Sarah was bringing up about fire is so important. And I'm glad that you're raising that point. I've heard from our fire bureau about growing concerns about the cottage cluster developments and the close space between those structures at 25-foot height limits. I don't think that our fire bureau is necessarily totally pushed for access. And it's not just access to get to the fire and the hoses to the development or the fire. It's getting people out of the buildings. So getting a ladder up and having a slope on that to get somebody over their shoulder and down the ladder, right? So we don't want the ladder to be like nearly vertical. Things that as a planner, I would never start to think about. But as we're seeing the developments happen, we're starting to see more of these issues popping up. And I think zoning in the past has been sort of this protector. It establishes a baseline for other codes to kind of adjust to and be vetted against. But as we keep making that more and more flexible on the zoning standpoint, we're seeing more types of conflicts come up. And the notion of deferring some of that decision making to a public facilities review or a fire plan review, that gives builders almost no certainty walking in the door. I mean, if you know the setback's 10 feet and the fire codes meet 10 feet, great. But if you think the setback's 5 feet and the fire bureau comes back and says, oh, actually, you got to shift it back 3 more feet, then that could upset the whole review. So we don't want to set people up for failure. And I think that's also really important to consider.
Oh, thanks, Morgan. So I'm going to actually, Kathy, I'm going to invite you in since I haven't heard from you, and then we'll go Alexandra and Brandon.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo because I live in a small community and it's rural coastal, the fire issue is a big deal for us. The access in between buildings, even more so than around the building. So that's a big issue, and I echo everything that's been said. I also, because I've also lived in another community, not Oregon, I wonder if, I don't know if this is a solution, but code can sometimes be written when it concerns parking to say that it depends on the access to public transportation, right? So if if you're inland and you have access to transportation, you can reduce parking. But if you're someone like us at the coast and there's no public transportation to speak of really, then limiting parking is just crazy, right? It just makes it impossible, especially to create affordable housing, when we're eliminating people's ability to have a vehicle, because there is no parking anywhere in our communities. And so in code, perhaps it alleviates that distinction if you add in language about what's available, what's accessible, because you can have public transportation access in downtown Portland that you don't have here on the coast.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. Alexandra and then Brandon.
Just to further highlight Morgan's points on the fire code issue, we don't want this to be an issue that the developers are encountering like after they've already got their plans in hand and they come to the counter and we say, no, actually there's a public facilities need, or no, like actually that doesn't work with how tall our fire trucks are, or any of those things. This is something we're already seeing as a problem across communities in Oregon. We don't need to make it worse. We're already seeing developments that have been built that have fire code issues that do not, have adequate accessibility for fire, for trash trucks, things like that. We really don't need to make it worse, especially because the folks that will impact most are our low-income Oregonians and our communities of color.
Thanks, Alexandra. Brandon?
Oh, make sure I lower my hand so it's not, there we go. I guess just to potentially be the last one on the fire piece here, to put a button on it. I appreciate, Ethan, what I heard a second ago. Local governments could still, move forward and try to address those. In looking at the rules as presented, though, the most recent, what is it? 0470020. It says a local government shall not establish requirements uniquely for the Oregon Homes Development. And then in 0470040, a local government may apply only the following siting standards. And it doesn't give us the option. So I would like to assume health, safety, fire, but the rules don't say that. So if the intent is to give us that flexibility and that option, I respectfully request that you include it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Brandon.
very helpful. I can respond, and let's make sure that this, at least the intent of that, because I hear what you're highlighting, Brendan. And let's make sure that we pick this up when we get into the actual rules sections themselves. The section 0020 speaks to the additional reviews that a local government may use, as they are not even additional. The reviews that a local government may apply to Oregon Homes or any development for that matter. And that 020 section that you highlighted just says you can apply those existing review processes, but you can't create your own like Oregon Homes specific set of those processes. You just use the ones that you already have and that you apply to other processes. And then later, when we're talking about siting standards, those are like that universe of those siting standards, zoning, for example, which would not preempt a local government from saying, okay, we have this fire access issue, or there's this easement or something like that, that is through the course of those reviews somewhat altering those standards that are applicable to like the baseline development under Oregon Homes, because it's lot specific, it's like development specific. And so that opportunity is still present through the application of those existing processes that local governments apply to just development writ large. So let's make sure that one, if that makes sense and is the right approach, and two, if we can actually find that path and follow those steps in the rules that are drafted. Maybe the answer to both of those questions is no, and that's what we're here to talk about today.
Thanks, Ethan. Sarah?
Thank you, Ethan. I apologize. I think I followed you and then I lost you. But the other thing, just what I think I grabbed from that, how do we do that without now creating a discretionary review process? That's I think where I like when we talk about public facilities or the determination for fire access and need. I mean, if our local codes have already addressed that through zoning, right? Because that is where it comes from, is through zoning. We get fire letters and all that good stuff as part of that. How does that work and how do we keep it from not being discretionary? If I understood you correctly.
Right. Help me walk me through the example, because here's an example that I'm thinking of, right? Development, the land use siting standard is a 5-foot setback, right? The development application goes through and it comes back from those reviews and says, you know what, we actually, because of the height of the building, there's a, fire access standard, for example, that says, no, we actually need access to that. And therefore the setback is 10 feet for this development. To me, those are all objective-based decision-making criteria.
So doing planning at the local level, what I would offer is that there's nothing in our codes that may say that, except through your front yard setback is X amount, your side yard setback is X amount. And now we've interjected, if the fire department says that, we've interjected a standard based on a letter. So I'm very interested in this conversation. I just don't know, when you look at how planning actually works at the local level, I don't want to speak for others, but I don't think I can do that. I don't think legally I can do that.
So are you saying if you already don't have, for example, a 10-foot setback in your local zoning code, you would not be able to kind of take a letter from the fire department that says, based on this, it needs to be 10 feet for our access? Okay. So this is where it sounds like that's part of the rub here, is like, how do you land on something that's applicable statewide that has then these localized places of conflict that I think this group is continually trying to reconcile, but I don't know, Ethan, if you're hearing the same thing, but Sarah.
Yeah, that was the exact point I was going to make is, yeah, this is that that conversation about how much one, how flexible can the standards in Division 47 be, right? They could be, I think the purpose and intent of those is that they're not really that flexible. They are standard, right? That's the kind of like fundamental premise. But how does that interact with the local standards and the actualities and the realities of development? That's the tricky part, certainly. And hearing this conversation today, I'm definitely willing to say that we don't have it quite right quite yet.
So let's go to Samantha, and then the second part of today's conversation is really to dive into the rules in more depth, and it feels like we're going into that place, and there's some topics very specifically that both your colleagues have submitted in comment earlier, but also I think that have been raised in this part of the conversation. So let's go, Samantha, then let's take a break, and then let's dive into rule language and try to reconcile and grapple with some of what y'all are naming. Samantha?
Yeah, so I just want to flag, I think for this conversation has been really enlightening, and it's sort of why on the first day of our RAC, I asked whether there would be an opportunity to suggest to the legislature or whatever that there might be some reevaluation of the statute. Because when we get to the land use side of things, it's much more complicated than the building permitting. And this conversation really has highlighted that for me. So I know that's not normally what happens on a RAC, and sometimes people can see that as like maybe negative or a failure of a RAC. I don't view it that way. I actually think that's a positive thing that a RAC could do, is highlight some potential statutory clarifications that are needed. So just going to make that plug again.
Thanks, Samantha. Alexandra, and then we'll take a break and then we'll go into the rules.
Heavy second for what Sam just said. I know I've been frustrated and cranky today. It's partially because this bill is just kind of not workable. It doesn't make a ton of sense. It never really did. And that's not a bad thing. I think in implementation, we've encountered what a lot of the issues are. And it is entirely okay to go back to the legislature and say, hey, we need some changes to make this something that we can implement. We know what those changes are. Here is your list. Because implementing this now will not serve the people of Oregon. And it is okay. Like, no one's gonna come after the agency for saying this is just not something we can implement at this time, and there are some statutory changes needed.
Thanks, Alexandra. So let's take a break. I'm going to challenge the group to continue working towards finding a path to implementation and implementable, not setting your comments aside from the legislative standpoint, but as we get into the rules, where can we reconcile? And then, just listening to the group, if there's places that really are conflicts that need legislative fixes, let's identify those as well. So it's 10:22 on my clock. Let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:32. We'll do a little bit of briefing on kind of an overview, and then we'll dive into conversation. See you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I guess you have one more, got about 1 more minute. Slowly work your way. This is your 30-second prep call. So for RAC members, if you come on screen or give a thumbs up, I'll know you're here with us. And at 10:32, we'll pull the slides back up. And Becky, I think I'm passing it to you to introduce. So we can go. Thank you.
Be back. All right. First, I just wanted to thank everyone for our discussion in the first couple hours of the RAC. I think, yeah, just highlights there's a lot more for us to noodle on. Also want to stress, this is version 2. This is not the final version of rule. Very much need your conversation today. And we'll also cover later on in the agenda kind of the next steps of rulemaking and outlining public comment process for the formal adoption process. And also one other preamble before diving in is there has been pointed out there's a couple areas of just kind of typos, errors. We removed the one variance and adjustments section so that kind of cleanup that needed to happen. So the version of draft rules you received, there's some kind of those edits we are aware of, but feel free to point those out as well to us. And yeah, with that, I will dive in. So next slide. So we have added definitions for public facilities plan and traffic impact analysis. So that's very clear. Our discussion this morning about fire safety, I was just looking at those definitions and they don't call that out explicitly. So there's work there in terms of those are definitions from other ORS. So I don't know if there's really opportunity to change that, but so that's something that's just top of mind after our discussion. So I wanted to address that first. We also updated the definition of design and siting standards to exactly match what's in Division 46, because that's some of the comments we received of making that as matching to other, housing rules and laws to make things easier to implement. We've also adjusted the definition of Oregon Homes development to make it clear that third pathway, that local building code review, is a viable option. And then as we discussed, adding the definition or changing the definition of Oregon Homes lot about environmentally sensitive areas, which I think after our conversation today maybe needed to be revisited there. So those are the changes in the definitions section. So maybe I'll pause there if there's any specific thoughts or questions on those changes.
Becky, we can, if this is how you want to do it, we can kind of move section by section. So want to pause here for definitions or any feedback? I mean, other than what Becky's already reflected on what folks have shared today. Yeah, Morgan.
Sorry, I don't know if we're getting into the discussion here or just questions about the changes.
Just jump right in.
So I think Sam was starting to bring up a concern about the local government review process, and I have some comments about that, just in terms of what I think it means for local governments. So, and this is a little bit, I think, not DLCD's fault. I think this is the legislation calls us out as a land use decision, which is weird for a ministerial non-discretionary review. But currently we review building permits through a ministerial process. There's no land use review that goes along with that. So we can theoretically approve them essentially over the counter, although we don't quite do that. But there's no formal denial that's issued. There's no notice of that. There's nothing that goes along with that. So if we're being required to issue a denial, I think that means we got to turn these building permits into what we would call type 1 review process, which is a land use review, comes with notice, comes with the process for appeals and so forth. So I mean, this may sound strange, but I'm hoping that's not what's being applied. So that's my comment on that.
Yeah, it's a point that we've noticed too within the bill language, calling it out as a land use decision. But I think what we're I think what you're mentioning is also how I believe the program is intended to function, which is that it is not like a full review, and those denials and all the notice and things that come with that are not included.
And Morgan, is your comment that it should be explicitly?
Well, I think what I'm challenged with is at least, and so this is just a sort of local practice. When we have a building permit that doesn't meet, like if someone submitted a commercial building in a residential zone, we would just refuse to accept the application. That's the version of denial. An applicant has a process they can go through to challenge that, which is sort of a separate way to approach that. That just keeps it as a ministerial building permit review. And I'm hoping there's flexibility within the language of the statute and the direction the DLCD has to keep it as a ministerial building permit review, and not. I mean, I think what I'm reacting to is the issuance of a denial language. So just for consideration.
Yep.
Can I ask a follow-up? And it's actually not to you, Morgan, it's to you, Fred. I saw you nodding along. I'm just curious if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we do the same thing. So a residential building permit, we don't treat it as a land use decision. So.
Okay. Thank you. Samantha? If you're talking, we can't hear you, Samantha. Or I can't. All right. Can you hear us, Samantha? Doesn't seem to be muted.
You hear me now?
Yay, there we go.
Okay, sorry, I plugged my computer and it hooked up to my headphones, I guess. So I have concerns in the same section, section 8, but the language application shall be denied. I think I have some concerns there because I have had jurisdictions that try to be very flexible with applicants if they know that maybe their application isn't going to be good, they allow them to cure, or they just try to work with them to figure out if what they're applying for is the best route possible without doing a formal denial and making them completely restart. And I don't know, if this would necessarily trigger it, but some jurisdictions have cooling off periods where after an application is denied, they can't go resubmit another application for a period of time. And so I just felt like reading this language was a little prescriptive and would take away some of the flexibility in customer service that some of the jurisdictions try to use.
Yeah, Ethan.
I'm gonna call in Maddie here, actually. I don't know if you've got a thought on, because I think we were you could describe this land use review process as what amounts to like a completeness check. And that would result in like a non-complete application, which then would allow a builder, to do that, go through the curing process, or say, no, actually just review my application. So it wouldn't like preempt any of those two options, at least that's not the intent, but we need to make sure that comes through.
Yes, you're saying the denial isn't like a formal decision.
Right. But then also kind of piggybacking on Morgan's comment, right, making sure that that's actually what the rules are intending or actually doing. But Maddie, please feel free to jump in.
Appreciate, Sam, your explanation, and my experience has been similar, where local governments
So maybe is there a question there, Maddie? Like, is there a different way to describe it in the draft rule where you get to the same outcome without the letter of denial? Is that the question here?
If RAC members have a suggestion, or if there are best practices that communities use to address that concern or speak to that collaborative, sometimes it's referred to as getting to yes, or getting to an application that can be reviewed because it is complete, that language is welcome here.
Right, Samantha?
I think, a first place to start would be swapping that shall to a may. So then at least it's the local government's discretion to decide to deny. And then you might want to think about a different wording, or even just some guidance after the code is adopted. Unfortunately, I have to go. I can't stay for the whole time. But I said on the record most of the things I wanted to say today, but I will send some additional in writing as well.
Good, thanks, Samantha. So for our local government folks, for that question, is there the shall to a may? I guess, is there a response to that? Yeah, Morgan?
May is better. At least, it has a better chance of being able to fit into all the various ways that local cities apply, and counties apply to their process. I was thinking about the comment about public works and the denial, and I will admit I'm a little outside my lane here because I don't do public works reviews, but my impression on those sorts of requirements is, like building permit, there's theoretically a way to get to a yes. It's just how much money are you gonna throw at the problem? So, if the public works issue is you don't have sewer, you build a sewer line, and that could cost millions of dollars, and that's, by all virtue a denial. But the city isn't denying your permit; they're just saying this is what you need to have to build here, which is different. So I think just kind of keeping that in mind in terms of language is also important.
Yeah, thanks, Morgan.
Morgan, I appreciate that, and I think in a number of instances, I think there have been concerns that how to reconcile a public works requirement with a proposal, in which the proposal may have to change in order for the public works requirement to be met. So in other words, if a proposal needs to be modified to say adjust the building or change which building is placed, what footprint is placed on the eligible lot as a result of some public works related restriction or constraint of the property itself. I think that in that instance, because of the expeditious nature of the intent of the program, there may not be as much exchange or back and forth that happens to negotiate, but rather the applicant may need to propose a different building, in which case, in the context of Oregon Homes, a different building would be a new application.
I think I get what you're talking about. So like a right-of-way dedication removes enough of their lot depth that they can't fit the structure.
Correct.
As an example. Yeah. Yeah.
And it just, unfortunately, the nature of the program being an expedited review and expedited move to building permit might mean that there are less of those collaborative conversations that negotiate how to better fit the building, and may require the applicant to revert to another type or another size of permitted structure.
I guess I question, I mean, I know the intent is to have an expedited streamlined process. I think that's the objective. I guess I question whether that means we have to stipulate a new process for local governments where that flexibility is already provided in their building permit process. I think what DLC might be struggling with is in cases where there is resistance to an Oregon Homes development from some local jurisdiction. The fear might be that they are somehow preventing Oregon Homes from siting based on, I don't know what process delays. In which case, there's a whole separate process through HAPO to file a housing violation. So I don't think you need to address. I don't think you need to write the standards to address a few bad actors. I think you have a process to do that.
Thanks, Morgan. Cheryl?
I just second everything Morgan said. I think that those of us, I like to tell our customers we're here to build buildings. We love helping people build stuff. That's why I got in this business. So I think to address a few bad actors, that's exactly what HAPO was created for. I think, Madeline, what you brought forward is a pretty important comment. I think that, if it doesn't fit that box, we have to deny. What is interesting and challenging there, if you take a county, if I can't get that 5-foot setback because there's a 50-foot road dedication because they're going to come in 2 years when they take the road over and build a full street improvement, we just keep denying the application. And I think that really, or septic systems, we got to lay out a septic system on there that 5 foot may not even be close. I think that's where going back to those may and then instead referring back to the local jurisdictional standards gives us the ability to do that in that building permit, and our standards have those things baked in. And I think that's maybe where I'm struggling, is trying to figure out how we're going to help a customer who comes in and wants to put everything 5 foot from the front of the roadway and to the edge of the lot. And we got a septic system and a right-of-way dedication we got to figure out.
Well, Ethan, and then Becky, I wonder if maybe we at least preview the second set of slides, and then we can come back into the conversation. But Ethan, jump in.
Yeah, I wanted to, Jill, I'm so sorry. You're currently the only builder represented, and Brock, I mean, to some extent. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts in terms of like this conversation of the interplay between these standards from the land use perspective, but also what's going to come about as part of the other review processes, and how important is that that standardization of the land use standards in the context of certainty that you've got in like a building environment, if there's potential for those standards to change as part of the other reviews. So I don't know if you're grasping my question, but I'm just curious your thoughts. We've been hearing from local governments.
Yeah, I get what you're asking. I think I've said this in other meetings in a similar way, but it really is things like infrastructure review, which I think like an engineering review as it's explained in the definitions, zoning requirements, those really are the biggest barriers to any project, because building codes theoretically and in practice for the most part are it's the same code for the whole state. So unfortunately, I kind of agree with what we were talking about before the break. I don't know, for my clients, I don't know if this is a program they'll really use. And I am a little concerned about the kind of the nature. I wasn't part of the rulemaking. I'm not a lobbyist, so I don't really understand that process. But I kind of also agree it's maybe not going to be great legislation. But to try to get to a can-do like thing, I really do feel like rural communities, even county communities that are in the metro area, have really different like issues than a place like Portland, or even some place like Eugene or Salem. So I don't know how you're going to standardize even the simplest things like where the door is. However, I do think if there probably are builders that do kind of more massive, like mass scale, that do, like lots of homes at once, and they have like a couple of standard plans. I do imagine that this could help them. So it probably would be really good to talk about, home builders that are building kind of in more, maybe more suburban communities or kind of smaller jurisdictions, to find out what, if they feel like having consistent, knowing that at least your building plan is going to be approved, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll echo that a little bit. I think yes, I definitely think there's some legislative changes that need to be made here. When I went back to review the bill before the first RAC, I was kind of confused about a number of parts, and I'm like, how did we pass this? Because some of these things seem contradictory to each other, like even just within that 2 pages of statute. But in terms of I guess going back more to the fire life safety, and I don't know if this helps with the more recent part of the discussion around the public facilities and transportation review. I'll call it the preamble for Rule 40, the unnumbered portion of the rule. Do you think it would be helpful if we, and I mean local governments, if we added kind of a lead-in line there, except as necessary to ensure adequate fire ingress and egress or to ensure public safety, a local government may only apply, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so I think that allows you to provide a more standardized approach in the rule, while also saying, hey, like if, a 5-foot setback is not going to work for your fire department, you can say that it has to be at least 10 feet. Right. I think if we were to do that, there should be some kind of addition of, hey, here is where our local, fire and safety codes vary from what the standards in rule are. But I'm interested in the local government's perspective on whether or not that would be adequate to address some of those concerns.
Yeah, thanks. Ben, if I could, and Sarah, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'm gonna hand this or bring this back to connect a thread that I think, Brandon, you started. And this might be like exactly the point you were making earlier in the meeting of this connection between 0020 and the public facilities piece. I think it's subsection 7 and 40, the siting standards. So I hear that as like a connection between those two comments, but Brendan, please let me know if you feel differently now or later. But
well, let's go to Sarah, and then I want Becky, if you can kind of walk through the next set of slides. And then just Brock, can I ask a dumb question? Like maybe this is a DLCD and Brock question. Like you talked about changing in the preamble for the legislation, adding some language around kind of fire life safety. Is that not something that could show up in rule?
Oh, no, that's what I meant. I apologize.
Oh, okay.
I think generally some statutory changes are needed for the rules specifically.
Okay.
I was thinking about the preamble to Rule 40.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry, just to clarify. Sarah?
Thank you, Ben. So I would say before we start down that path, I think we need to read those rules and understand what they say before we start integrating them into here. Because, and I feel like I know just enough to be dangerous, but I don't think that's going to get us there. I'm going to go back to supporting the May and DLCD having confidence in local jurisdictions that we've already done that assessment and we have those partnerships with our local fire departments. And that's where, you know, what you see in our rules are because we've already done that work, and that work should be trusted and respected. The other thing I would say, that if you put anything in about, you know, we have the ability to make a decision to keep those setbacks. If you don't, again, if it remains discretionary, right, then that takes us out of that expedited review process. That's everybody's goal. But also with that, what are the criteria? Like, on what basis? So what are you, DLCD, going to look at from local jurisdictions to say that, other than we've already done this work and our local codes reflect it? So, I mean, if it's that easy, that would be amazing. But I just don't think it's going to be. And I think if we look at local fire codes and fire departments, we're going to be sorely disappointed in the lack of guidance and foundation that's going to give us, because they're not, outside of a fire letter, they're not, their rules aren't written that way. They're not going to help us to the extent that we're looking for. Thank you.
Thanks for naming that attention. Brock, I saw your hand, but Becky, why don't you introduce the next slide? But Brock, as we're transitioning, did you want to jump in, Brock?
Oh, I was just going to say, Sarah, thank you for that clarification. I wasn't aware that those weren't specified explicitly.
Yeah, thanks. All right, Becky.
Yeah, so I'll jump to citing standards. Sorry to take the slide out of order. But so that first bullet there, we've changed the language. So if you have the rules open 00401, so we still have that 5-foot setback, but as required, the distance can be adjusted for a proposed or existing utility easement. So to your point, Sarah, I don't know how definitive that, you know, definition or that kind of clause would be in terms of actually reviewing a plan, but we're trying to get at our conversation from last meeting of, you know, sometimes a utility easement is not, you know, recorded on the lot yet, but the jurisdiction kind of knows that that improvement is coming, that's going to be needed. So that's why it's proposed or existing utility easement. And I mentioned before, the variances and adjustments section has been removed. So what's on the screen are what a 10% variance is allowed for there. And that's something that I didn't catch in section 0020 on local government review. There was a line about needing to have written justification for a variance. That's not the case. It would just be, you're allowed the 10%. You don't have to provide justification. So that should be removed from that section. And then to finish out this slide, for design standards, we've removed the standards around window and pedestrian access, or not access, but those, the window, the facade, as those are seen to be addressed in building code. So those are the changes we've made to design and siting standards. And then just to name on the previous slide, tree standards, we haven't made any adjustments to the rules there in this version too.
All right, thanks. Becky, and is there additional context for the 10%? Like how you landed on 10%?
I believe that is kind of a, maybe that came from the model code. I'm pretty sure that came from the model code modeling after that.
SB, yeah, SB, which is based on SB 1537.
Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure folks understood the context for how that got there. Sarah?
I just want to ask if anyone's familiar with how you write or impose an easement on a property that has not yet occurred and how difficult that is. And the fact that I would say in a lot of areas as well, most of your utility easements are actually in the road right of way. So I'm not sure, like, I appreciate where you're trying to go with that. And I would be curious what others think, but one, you can't just arbitrarily put an easement on someone's property, especially if your rules aren't set up that way. And two, if utilities are typically in a road right of way, you can't justify an easement. It would be a takings.
Yeah, so that's a question, and I know Cheryl, you've talked about kind of the future kind of future shifts, but let's go Brock and then Morgan.
Yeah, to Sarah's point, we actually had to run a bill about this in 2025. We had a member who, and this was for her business, but general principle, who was told that they had to do a improvement repair, or no, it was an ADA improvement, to the street corner, in front of their business. ODOT was simultaneously, ODOT and PBOT, going through and doing those ADA corners on like a 1.5 mile stretch, of which her property was part. And it took years of going back and forth between, all the departments, to try to figure out whether or not this was just going to be included as part of the project that was already budgeted for and appropriated. And I think actually there was a point where even they had finished construction, but for that corner, because they were placing it on the applicant there. And so part of what, if my memory serves, we heard is the explanation is that there is not generally as much coordination as you might expect in that instance. And so, the transportation department might know where a proposed easement is going to be. The permitting department might not. So to reinforce Sarah's point, I think there is some tension there.
Yeah, thanks. Morgan?
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is even necessary. I mean, if there's an existing, at least for existing easements, regardless of what the setback says, you can't build in an existing easement. So it just becomes a trespass or a nuisance issue. For proposed easement, I think Sarah's right. I think there may be situations where I don't see how this would be occurring, but it could be in conjunction with the Middle Housing Land Division potentially, where you've got easements running with the subdivision approval. But yeah, and it's difficult to apply an easement to a property outside of going through the Nolan Dolan findings, all that stuff, proportionality, etc.
Thanks. Cheryl?
I am a engineer, not a planner. I just play a planner on TV, trying to be a planner too. As my planning director says, I got my planner one a couple of years ago. I'd have to go back to my team. I believe where we address this in setbacks, because we do know future improvements and because we have a lot of rural roads that eventually will change and be handed over or transferred to cities. That's where that conflict shows up. So you asked kind of how we address it. I believe that's part of it, because it's correct. These are utilities that eventually go into a right of way, but the right of way isn't there yet because the improvements aren't made. But that exact technicality would have to go to my planning team.
Did you, Cheryl, I know you all submitted some comments. Does the language that you see here address the scenario that I feel like you've been describing now for several meetings?
Yeah, no, I appreciate how hard it is to get a packet together, because goodness knows I do board packets every week. And coming so late, I was out of the office on Monday. My team has not reviewed this. This is really my first pass at this. We are going to be submitting written comment, and then I'm going to let my team go through. I just sent it to my principal planner this morning, and she's taken a look at it. So yeah, I wish I could answer that, Ben. I honestly can't right now. If I do, I'm gonna mess it up because my planner skills aren't good enough.
Yeah,
so.
don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. All right, thanks, Sharon. Fred?
Yeah, so I remember, I think it was last meeting, Morgan said essentially what standards, when we were asked about the design standards, and I think even removing things like window and pedestrian standards. Again, the way I'm seeing this, at least because I mean I see how we get development around here is folks will have a house plan or whatever, and they'll find lots that they can put it on, right? If they can get 12 units on a lot, they're going to use that plan in whatever cheap lot they can pick up. And so that circumvents our ability to zone for that. It circumvents our design standards. It will circumvent our setbacks. It will circumvent our parking requirements. It will circumvent our height limit, because our height limit in residential zones is 35 feet. I see that buildings could be over 35 feet. Based on that, what I anticipate doing, folks doing is having a set of plans and then going out and essentially just putting it wherever they can find the opportunity to put that building. Based on that, I would say, why don't we have some design standards in here? Why wouldn't we establish some base quality of homes if we're circumventing the ability for local governments to do that?
In fact, this may be a written comment question, but are there I mean, you've alluded maybe to some of those standards, but are there specific things that for at least City of Independence that you would want to see?
Yeah, yes, and I've mentioned them in previous meetings. A window requirement is a good requirement. I encouraged folks to defer to the model code. It's like, okay, that's fine. We have more stringent standards than that, but the model code at least gets you part of the way there. Also, we do not allow snout garages in the City of Independence. We haven't done it for 15 years. And so I would encourage that as well. Another thing that I'll just bring up is the building code and its regulation of windows is typically regulating egress windows. And so that's for a bedroom. So if you're putting no bedroom on the front of the house, there's no need for a window then on the front portion of the building. And I think we shouldn't be allowing that. Part of it is for neighborliness, right? It's good for folks to be able to see out of their house and what's going on in this on the street. So I would definitely encourage some degree of window requirement on the front of a building.
Thanks for. I thought I saw a hand. Was there, Morgan, was that you? Yeah, I thought it was like a flash of a hand.
Of course it was me. Of course it was me. No, Fred hit on it, and I think Ethan knows I'm not the biggest fan of the model code, but I do think it serves as a good basis. I'm not sure why we would undo all the work that DLCD has done to put together that model code. There are a number of standards in there that have been pretty well vetted. Personal preferences aside. So I think that's something to explore. And I'm not sure why we're sort of starting over on that conversation. I will just add to that, just to put a finer point on Fred's point about front windows. It's not just about neighborliness. It's also a crime prevention, environmental design approach to have eyes on the street. So there's a public safety aspect to that. I also noticed there's no specific setback for the garage, which is concerning in terms of public safety and backing egress and backing into kids, having visibility of the sidewalk and so forth. So that's something else I would stress. My big comment on the design standards, and I think this kind of goes back to the previous section a little bit, was this interpretation of the statute that talks about the development area per dwelling unit. And that's not what the statute says. The statute calls out 2,200 square feet for house, ADU, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and then differently says 1,400 square feet per unit for cottage cluster or multi-unit development. So just assuming they meant 2,200 square feet per unit is a big step, a big leap. So that's a problem just on its face, but the results, the outcome of that, by increasing the allowable size of those units, assuming just a $300 per square foot cost, every 500 square feet of floor area you're adding adds $150,000 to the price of the unit. So if we're talking at least comparison, in Portland, fourplex on a 5,000 square foot lot can be 4,000 square feet. These, I don't know if they're citing our design standards, I'll get those mixed up. These standards allow for an 8,800 square foot fourplex. So you're talking about fourplex units that are $360,000 more expensive than what would be allowed in Portland, more than doubling the cost of those units. Now, you could argue builders aren't going to necessarily build to the full size of those allowances. I mean, you could argue that, but there's also changes to the definition of what a fourplex is that allows them to be independent detached units. So you're basically talking about 2,200 square foot homes. And yeah, I could see builders building that. Is that bad? Not necessarily, but we are also trying to meet our equitable outcomes in terms of serving communities and more diverse types and costs of housing, and sort of blowing that all out of the water. Again, going back to the point about being an end run around our local zoning, doesn't do service to that. So I strongly caution and advise that we at least relook at and revisit our interpretation around that. I will say that there's some continued unclarity around what development area is. I think that's the language in the bill. And I think Brock brought this up in our first RAC meeting, which I thought was interesting because I thought I understood what it was. And the more I think about it and look into it, I actually don't know what it means. And even reading this, I still don't know what it means. So I think there's an opportunity for DLCD to at least provide a little more clarity around that aspect. Thanks.
Good. Thank you, Margaret. Jill? Jill, you're on mute.
I pressed the button. I agree with, I think that window street facing, well, okay, for glazing, I feel like a 10% wasn't, it was, sorry, it was 15% on the facade that had the door. I felt like that was a reasonable ask. And I don't know why you would take that out. I think maybe if you wanted to compromise, maybe you get rid of you just keep the 10% on the other sides. Maybe you don't have that requirement if you want. I guess that was really the only thing I felt really strongly about. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. Other thoughts, reflections, comments? I know these are highlights of changes, but this is also kind of opening it up to any other parts of the rules. Brock, jump in.
A little bit of an obscure one, but looking at Rule 30, subsection 3 or section 3, storage facilities for trash and recycling. Storage facilities isn't defined. When I hear facility, I read structure, and I don't know that that's what was intended. It only describes, the basically visual block, right? A hedge or a wall or a fence. Facility makes it sound like it has to have like an overhang or be enclosed or something like that. I don't know if storage space is sufficient. I think that gets to the intent. The word facility just gives me a little hesitation there.
Thanks, Brock. Was there, I don't know, for DLCD, was there any conflict there? I don't know if everybody feels like, I don't disagree. Brock, facility does imply more than just a space. But yeah, Ethan, jump in.
Yeah, I don't, I think this is giving flexibility to say you don't have to have a storage quote unquote facility, like a structure covered screened thing in all instances. There might be some instances where that's appropriate, and where you do, it does have these screening requirements. But I can understand the point that how do we know what's a facility and what's not? So like, I hear that.
Yeah, Brock.
I think even adding a definition in Rule 10 just for clarity purposes would be helpful.
Okay. Brandon.
I appreciate the slides that were put up there walking us through some of those big kind of the bigger changes. I guess I want to make sure that as I was reading through version 2 compared to version 1, I didn't inadvertently miss something. Is it possible, Ethan and or Becky, can you send us the red line? I think that would be very helpful. It would be helpful to me. I don't want to speak for everybody else, but it would be very helpful.
Whoa. I just got an explosion of thumbs up. So
right.
it's a popular ask. I
All
think
right.
that's the first time I've experienced that. So Ethan,
Consensus
you
for the
wanna
first time. Yeah.
respond?
Yeah, happy to. Happy to.
And also the slides, because I know we didn't, or at least those few, highlighting the programmatic interpretation.
Yeah, part of this is like total agency speak, but part of how we have to submit the rules to the Secretary of State requires us that they are clean because it's all a new division. So we opted not to do, but yeah, totally understand from like a readability user perspective, that would be very helpful.
We're going to have to add that to the introduction of reactions, because I don't know how the heck that happened. Maybe it was just simultaneous thumbs up, but that was, I don't know if everybody experienced that. That was the joy of my day right there. Thanks for that ask, Brandon. Other thoughts, reflections, again, you had the slide examples that I think were some of the high level highlights of changes, but were there other aspects of rules or kind of diving deeper into it that folks wanted to bring up? Or for DLCD, any follow-up questions for clarity? Let's go Fred and then Morgan and then Cheryl, then Brock.
Yeah, I'll just say it again. I would love some degree of local zoning to remain in the process that we can use to evaluate these proposals. Again, use, height, setbacks, things like that, please. Something like that would help, I think, with the acceptability of this program for people who are going to have these things built next to them. Again, we've vetted all of those things through local processes, and I would just please refer somehow to that.
Thank you, Fred. Morgan?
It seems like we're in the clearinghouse section of our discussion, so I just have a couple things I haven't touched on. I think just one actually. So around the usable open space, I made the comment at the last RAC meeting. The 15% requirement is essentially the area that the setbacks encompass. So if you just take 5 feet around the perimeter of a lot, that's 15% of your lot area. So if that's what we're talking about, usable outdoor area, I don't play tennis, but I don't think you can do that. 5 foot setback. And there's some other examples of what constitutes open area, but none of these things are really, they're not going to fit in the 5 foot setback. So I just think there is a mention of a 10 foot by 10 foot square for an outdoor area surface. That's one of the things, but then it goes on to include things like natural area with benches. So that could be the side yard with a bench in it. Gardening with 50 square feet is a 5 foot by 10 foot long gardening bed, raised bed. So just I think a little more fine point explicitness on what constitutes as usable open space.
Thank you, Morgan. Cheryl?
Taking notes there. I guess I want to say I support 100% Fred's comment about local zoning. I think a lot of these questions, whether more, meeting local character or some of the things that just don't fit for like a county, I think that would solve some of the problems. I will be pursuing written comment, as I noted. Still some concerns about the site plan requirements. It seems to indicate that the site plan is just the requirements that are in this legislation. We need to see things like septic systems, where they are on the property, setbacks to them and things like that. If I have to approve a site plan that doesn't have that, we're kind of setting us up for conflict when we get to that, other improvements. So I'm not sure. I'll see if my team has some suggestions, but I know that's one of the things. We have a lot of things on the site plan for a reason, so we can get it up front and figure out where we got conflicts, because it's not unusual where buildings need to move because they're proposing to put it all in their drain field.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Brock?
Yeah, another kind of wonky one. But looking at Rule 30, Section 1, subsection D. So we have A, B, and C face the street, 45-degree angle, or open to a common space that's adjacent. And then D says open to a covered porch or patio, blah, blah, blah. And have at least one entrance facing the street. I think instead of facing the street, we should say which complies with subsection A, B, or C of this section. Just as a plug for additional flexibility there. Is that because it seems to imply that D, yeah, you can have it open to a covered porch or patio, but it has to be directly facing the street.
Ethan, I see you thinking. Did you have a follow-up? Okay, just processing.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Brock. Yeah, Jill?
About what Brock just brought up, I don't know if I'm understanding you right, but I thought that it would generally it's okay to have the door not face the street if it opens onto a porch. I thought that was the intent. That they're kind of they're sort of like two different paths.
Yeah, so there's a couple different options that it has. So the pedestrian entry orientation has to meet at least one of the following four standards. Face it, 45-degree angle, common space that's adjacent, or covered porch or patio, but then the sentence ends with and have at least one entrance facing the street. So the way that I'm reading that, it couldn't be a covered porch or patio and be at a 45-degree angle, or and be facing an open area that's adjacent to the street.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I've been able to process, Ben. I wonder if this is a vestige of translation and from version 1 to 2, because I see your point, Brock. Like why mention facing the street twice if you can just accomplish it under A? So yeah, I think that's more of a cleanup item.
Yeah, for sure.
I just wanted to also go back to the street facing glazing. I can't remember if the previous version had this, but I think if you decide that it's worth having a street facing glazing requirement or a front entrance facing glazing requirement, I think that it should only count. Make sure that you add the language about it if the unit is within like 25 feet of the street to accommodate a project that maybe has units behind. That seems less critical to me to like have that street facing glazing when you can't even see them from the street. So I just wanted to add that clarification. I also feel like as a compromise, I wouldn't be offended if you wanted to have the entrance. It's supposed to have, so I think it's better instead of having no glazing requirement, maybe you could do 10% as a compromise on the entrance facing one. Thanks.
Jill? Okay. I mean, we'll talk before we close about next steps. Certainly a lot of conversations here that will likely show up in written comment. Ethan, jump in.
Yeah, sorry, back to Jill's point. I think that if a building is within 25 feet of the street, it then has front glazing requirements. And I think this is an interesting one to think about in the context of Oregon Homes, right? If we're thinking about those buildings being pre-approved, right, under options 1 and 2, how do we structure a system where the land use standards, this being 10% glazing facade if the building's within 25 feet of the street, Building Codes Division is not going to be reviewing those options 1 and 2 pre-approved plans through the lens of, okay, this building could potentially be built within 25 feet of the street, and therefore it's got this window glazing standard. So that's just a really, I just say that in terms of, how version 3 develops of the rules. That's one of the things we need to think about in the crafting of the language of the standards, because there is that kind of interplay. The state interpretation with option 3 does change that decision-making process a little bit, and ensuring that we've got standards that do apply in the instance where a builder is just going straight to the local government for building code review under the Oregon Homes program. So it's a interesting one to unpack in the context of this program, is all I'm highlighting.
Joe?
Yeah, Ethan, and I totally understand what you're saying. And that's maybe why I think that's my problem with this package. That's like that you can't think about windows when they have more ramifications than just building code.
No, thanks, Joe. Fred?
Yeah, so one other thing with regard to that option 3, I've worked in a bunch of small communities, and I will say building officials vary pretty significantly. Indeed, they use the same set of rules, but the skill with which they process permits can vary quite drastically. And so, I mean, what option 3 does is potentially allow somebody who has limited skill at reviewing a building to essentially like approve a house that another person looking at might not find meets the code. And so my question is, what happens in a situation like that?
Is that a DLCD question, or is that's an open question for like, we
Yeah.
gotta solve for that as part of the considerations for that interpretation?
I would say so.
Okay. Thanks, Fred. So let's move to the timeline, because obviously y'all have generated a lot for DLCD. There's still plenty of work that we're asking of you all in terms of getting comments in, but Ethan, you want to talk about that?
Actually, I'd like to go to the impact statements first.
Okay.
This is for folks who've been part of a rulemaking process before. This is an important part of the rulemaking step. It's the impact statements. There are 3: fiscal impact statement, housing impact statement, and racial equity impact statement. These are requirements on state agencies to write up a description of the impacts of the rules that are being proposed for adoption in the context of all 3 of these lenses. So those are included. Draft versions of those are included in your packet, and I just want to make sure that folks are taking a look at those. It's it's outside of the rules themselves, but another opportunity to share with the agency any feedback or comments or concerns you have on those documents as they're presented. Those will go to the Secretary of State as part of, and this kind of, maybe here's our good transition into the timeline, Ben. Those will go into the packet or a packet of materials that go to the Secretary of State for the publication of, I'll call it like the final draft version of the rules on July 1st, 2026. Those will be the draft version or the version of rules that will open up the public comment period and the public hearing in front of LCDC at their meeting in July. And then we'll lead into, there's a real narrow window from that point on to make any updates for commission adoption at their meeting in August. So I just want to call attention specifically to those impact statements and open an opportunity for folks to provide comments on those should they like to.
Yeah, so you see 2 things simultaneously. One, there's timeline to get continuous feedback. And then we did want to hold some space if folks had some initial thoughts on the impact statements. Brock, let's start with you and then Kathy.
Yeah, apologies if I missed it. Ethan, is there a deadline that you want any written comments by?
Good question. Not a hard and fast deadline for you all, but I'll give you a sense of our timeline, which is we begin the series of reviews to prepare for July 1st publication by Secretary of State in mid-June. So if you would like your comments incorporated, please get them in advance of that. So really, I could look at the calendar here. Maybe we just pick a date. How about that? The 8th of June, I'm going to throw out as a potential deadline for commentary, particularly on the impact statements.
Yeah, good question, Brock. And then, of course, I'll just say on behalf of DLCD, probably as early as you can get things in, the better for capacity. Kathy?
No, I had a similar question about the
okay.
deadline. Thank you.
Yep. Brandon?
There we go. Looking at this calendar, seeing that we have a RAC meeting number 6 there in early July. There was a lot of comments, a lot of suggestions, a lot of input provided today. Giving additional written comments on version 2, yes, that makes sense. Is there going to be a version 3 coming that we should then be on the lookout for? If so, when? And then, I mean, I think because there's a version 2, we've essentially tossed version 1 aside and comments should be focused there. If there's going to be a version 3, how helpful are continued comments on version 2, right? I'm just trying to understand what is coming our way between now and July 6th.
Yeah. Brock, similar comment?
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, even if there's like if you give us like a overview list of the changes that you're considering based on the conversation today so that we know specific suggestions to give.
Yeah. I would use the version 2 as the place to put your comments in, red lines, because we'll use that as the basis for version 3. I will also say we are getting close to this kind of really strange but necessary pivot in a rulemaking stage, which is right now, even though these RAC meetings are somewhat formal and, all of that kind of stuff, it's in the scope of rulemaking, really kind of in an informal public comment period now. And July 1st opens what is a very formal rulemaking public comment period, which at that point in time, really July 1st, we're going to transition you all to really preparing your comments and feedback, not to DLCD staff necessarily, but to actually the Land Conservation and Development Commission. And because they're the folks who will be making the final decision on the adopted version of the rules. So all of that is to say, the meeting on, and actually I need to make a live change to some of these dates because I'm noticing they're actually incorrect. July 9th is actually that RAC meeting. And at that meeting, we'll have an opportunity to discuss the version of rules that will be published on July 1st. And again, we at that time will not be updating the rules based on that discussion on July 9th, because the version of the rules that will go to commission for their public hearing is the version that's published on July 9th. But to your point, Brendan and Brock, your point, I think we can, even in lieu of not a formal version 3, I think we can, as we have it or as it's necessary, kind of send you all some side homework via email if we've got particular points, or give you a call, email on a particular section. Brock, just through your comments, it might be we might be sending emails on section 30, for example, or rule 30, and others on the land use review piece. So
That's good. Brandon, do you want to ask a follow-up?
Yeah, that's helpful, Ethan. Thank you. I guess my follow-up question would be if there are still portions of the proposed rules as written that are unable to be implemented by the local government, right? Changes still have to be made in order for us to actually carry through the program. Looking at the language of the bill, section 3 says LCDC shall adopt initial rules on or before January 1st. So I guess my question is, if there are still changes that are needed, is LCDC, it looks like you're calling a special meeting on July 23rd. I guess I very much enjoy hanging out with all of you, and I'm more than happy to do it past July 9th. Is there a reason why you are wanting to push this before LCDC in July and then for effective date in September? Or is there room to potentially get it before LCDC at a later meeting?
the proposed work plan includes this July and September cadence. I will say this, the statutory deadline for commission to adopt initial rules is January 1st, 2027. But the work plan is structured such that the commission is adopting those well in advance of the January 1st deadline.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
And yeah, just another amendment to the slide, that special meeting for commission, I believe we were trying to pinpoint that down. I believe it is July 29th, not the 23rd. Apologies for the miscorrect or the
so
incorrect
maybe
dates.
yeah, before we send out follow-up the slides, we'll make those edits. And then I'll just interpret your response as the work plan is going to dictate the existing timeline and it will not be extended to later in the year. Is that fair, Ethan? I think Brandon
There's
was
no
specifically
plans
asking
currently.
if we haven't reconciled things, are we willing to push that timeline?
Yeah, there's no plans currently to do that, but I
Okay.
mean, just the nature of the timeline and the deadline in the bill, there is in theory time.
Okay, let's leave it there for now. Sarah?
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Ethan. Thank you both for the opportunity to be heard today. I hope that DLCD really takes into account the concerns that we've raised today as local jurisdictions and does not look at these as obstructionist or NIMBY, but rather as planning professionals who do this work every day, that we are trying to be very thoughtful about our concerns to you. To Brandon's request of the track changes, I appreciate that. I hope to see the feedback that we've shared reflected in this next draft. I would say from a local perspective, being responsible for a very large county, multiple cities and unincorporated communities, if DLCD does not propose to leave some of these development standards at the discretion of the local level and local jurisdictions, my city councils and county commissioners and fire departments are going to want to know why. And I would be prepared for some serious pushback. I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I will speak for Tillamook County and our cities. I would be prepared for some serious pushback if the concerns that we've raised are not implemented. And I think that an explanation from DLCD is going to be needed with that draft. Because as I start working on public comments and bring all of this information forward, I need to be able to say why our rules, our development standards are not going to be preserved. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Kathy?
Yeah, this may be some housekeeping. I'm just wondering how we get access to the public comments. Or if you could send us that link, because I've had trouble going to the website and finding those.
Oh no. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, we definitely want to get that fixed. The public comment will be, so I'm going to try to make a distinction here the best I can.
Yep.
Any public comment that we receive outside of that formal public comment period will be included in your packet. Any public comment, and in fact, we received some after the packet was published last week. So that'll go in your July 9th packet.
Okay.
And any public comment that we receive within that window, July 1st through the commission's adoption in August, will go to commission, not to the RAC.
Okay, and then I had a second point on the housing cost, on the housing cost impact statement. If we had some comments regarding, let's say, well, just in general on any of these impact statements on equitable access for people with disabilities, is that appropriate? In it, because there's not space really in racial equity. I'm thinking, should that be in the housing cost impact when we talk about garages, or just overall fiscal impact, because that's a community deeply impacted, not really in these impact statements.
Yeah, Ethan.
I would say I won't ask you to figure out which one it needs to go in, and we can figure out how to incorporate that commentary into those impact statements, whether it's kind of thread through all three of them, or if it's included in just one, or included in some of the staff report findings that we have for commission, all of the above, all of that kind of stuff. So don't feel like you have to do the legwork in terms of trying to figure out where to provide public comment to.
I'll note, Kathy,
Thank you.
when we reflect back on our initial conversation around the racial equity framework, people with disabilities, fair housing was named as kind of an overlay, an intersection with racial identity and disability. So, it certainly is in alignment with the conversation, the way that we've been framing the racial equity framework from the beginning. So if that's helpful, you can take that direction. Morgan, then Brandon.
I think that point might be worth bringing up in terms of your impact statements. Just like there might be a need to call out general equity, or expand the perspective on equity. I actually had two questions. One is around the September 14th Oregon Homes effective date. So I understand the work plan intends to get it adopted in advance of that date. I'm not sure, given the January 1 mandate from the bill, if there's necessarily a need to make them go effective before then. So could the LCDC adopt within a delayed effective date to give local jurisdictions time to put their programs into place? Also, based on some earlier conversation, if there's some legislative fixes that might be required, that might give us some time to get that taken care of also. So that's one thing. And then the second is sort of a curiosity question, because I don't remember. What are we doing in phase 2?
Yes, good. Yeah, well, I'm going to put a pin in that last one. We can touch on that in just a bit. But to your point, on your first point, the commission, I believe it is within their purview to determine what that effective date may be as part of their adoption. The reason why September 14th is typically it takes some time to just go through that actual submittal through the Secretary of State and get those published on the website and DOJ review and all that kind of stuff. So hence there's that 2-week delay. But I suppose the commission could establish a further in the future effective date. I believe that's within their purview.
Brandon and Brock.
Thanks. I want to touch on something you said a second ago, Ethan. You said that there have been comments that have come in since the packet was distributed. And you're also asking for additional comments and feedback on version 2. All of that will be included in our July 9th packet for review. Earlier, you said July 9th, any changes or anything that anybody has can't be factored in because it has already been published and gone out for public comment. So I would like to officially request that as comments have come into you guys at the agency, either already have come in or continue to come in, that you get them to us so we can look at them. Because I would love to be able to say, yeah, I agree with whoever that this is super important. Because if I don't have that opportunity until July 9th, I don't have that opportunity, period.
Fair, totally. I think we've got two. One came in today, and then Ingrid, I'm looking at you. One came in Monday or something like that. So yeah, I think that's a fair request.
Rock, yep.
Yeah, I'll throw a +1 on that. And for clarifying, and I think this is the way that it was explained to me last time, when we say that there aren't going to be any changes after the July 1, that just means that we won't be adding or subtracting rules. So we won't like add -60, right? But we can modify -30, -40, -50. We just have to have the actual like rule numbers
Yeah.
locked in. Yeah, okay.
Can I put one more fine point on that, Brock,
Yeah.
just for the clarity of the group? Yeah, so what Brock is referencing is that notice that gets published on July 1st. That is the scope of the rules that can be adopted by commission. And what Brock is mentioning, like if we notice on section and it goes all the way down to section 50, rule 50, we can't add a 60 because it wasn't proposed in the notice. So just a note for everyone who's interested in providing that public comment. But I will also say that that July 9th meeting and everything that happens post July 1 is not, there won't be like an interim draft that we publish before it goes to commission. Commission will be holding a public hearing on the version that was published on July 1st. Like the comments that we receive on the 9th, we won't create a supplemental packet or something like that for commission for the purposes of the public hearing.
And then one maybe just suggestion, given the number of issues that we're potentially having to work through before adoption, and the fact that the commission does want them adopted by, or in effect by September, I would encourage consideration, if needed, of a temporary adoption, just to give us a little bit more time. And then we could make changes within that 180-day period, and hopefully have a final, full adoption process after that. But I think that might be a way to have a little bit more wiggle room with that deadline.
Cheryl?
I'm gonna second some things that Morgan said. Seems like we're on the same wavelength today. I really, I do believe that if there's an opportunity, this is my first RAC, maybe out of line. I think there are some legislative changes that are needed in this bill, especially around the model, the ready build plans. I think we've all, since we've been wrestling with it, I think it would be good counsel to give that. And so if we could do that, I think there's an opportunity. I really would love to see the effective date go into January 1. It's a clean date. We know the date change. We need time to get this in our code. This is now going to be one of the things that we'll be adopting is, we'll be following the state land use rules, but it doesn't align with our code standards. And it's always a little bit wonky. So just the longer time on the jurisdiction side, it's easier for us to try to get the adoption process done.
Thanks, Cheryl. Alexandra?
I will also just pitch that if, the commission's allowed to set the effective date and we know that there are changes that are going to be needed, set it even further out than January 1. That way, no jurisdiction is asked to implement rules that we know we are going to have to change.
Thanks,
it is cleaner. It is easier for both the agency and for local governments. And realistically, with how these rules are going, it's better for the consumer and the developer who will not be able to access this program if it continues in its current state, because it won't be implementable in a way that is helpful to people.
Thanks, Alexandra. Any other process questions or any for today comments on the impact statements? Okay. Not seeing any. I think we can move to our closing. Go next slide. I think we've covered kind of some of the timelines. You'll see our next meeting, July 9th, 9 a.m. to 10:30. Ethan, did you want to offer any closing thoughts?
Yeah, you'll notice some, and this is going to try to transition this into your question, Morgan, about what's in phase 2. You'll notice some of the weird numbering on this slide, 5A, 5B. That was out of a the initial thought when breaking this work into phase 1 and phase 2 was that we would actually kind of begin to conclude the Oregon Homes piece and actually work into 2138 rulemaking, which is phase 2, actually as part of meetings 5A and 5B, hence the kind of titling there. But with the phase 2 rulemaking rollout, that meeting is actually not going to happen until later in the summer. We'll be kind of fully concluding phase 1 and then opening up phase 2. And Morgan, to your question, phase 2 is about the MH part of this rulemaking, in particular, the sections of House Bill 2138 that are related to, if you take a look at, for those who are interested in diving into statute or bill language, it's section 22 of that bill, which outlines a handful of rulemaking tasks for the department related to siting and design standards for middle housing, for SROs, for ADUs, and there are a couple other pieces there that intersect there with those housing types, siting and design standards specifically for those. And then a development of a statewide system development charge methodology. So together, those comprise phase 2 of this rulemaking. Again, that'll be kicking off August, September timeframe, and continuing through 2027. The deadline for adoption of the rules under phase 2 under House Bill 2138 is January 1st, 2028. There was another thing I was going to say on that. I lost it.
The process, RAC process?
Oh, yeah. I guess, yeah, just giving a little bit of a little bit more on phase 2. So that'll be again focused on 2138. It'll be a rulemaking cadence that is similar to what actually a little bit different from what we did here, trying to meet like once every other month to give you all space to review items and for DLCD to actually draft some of the rules in advance earlier in that process as we can make get the first draft of those rules published. Like the Oregon Homes piece, we had a few meetings where we were collecting information and drafting rules. Phase 2 is going to say, okay, we're going to be doing that, having those conversations, but try to get into draft rules as early in that process as we can. And the meeting cadence is one of the ways that helps us facilitate that, because there's time and distance between the rules, and it's not just focused on the packet and discussion, it's actually focused on the production of the rules.
Perfect. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, Diego, just got it just in time. Welcome, by the way. I missed that when you came in.
No, thank you. Just as one last note, I believe I brought this up in March as well, but just looking over the current draft of the rules as well as the development checklist, it would seem that the current siting definitions still exclude accessory dwelling units from being built, despite ADUs being mentioned in the bill and in the rules because it has to have been on a lot that either does not have a residential structure or has one that was demolished more than 5 years ago or less than 5 years ago if there's net new units, but there's not really a way to build something using these plans on a lot that already has a primary home.
Thanks, Diego. So is there,
That is one of the previously referenced statutory problems. That does not find its origin in the rules itself, but in the base statute that these rules are based off of. I will refer back once again. We need statutory changes before these rules can actually be implemented.
Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks, Diego, for raising that. I won't comment on legislative actions that will you all can find partnerships around. Any other final thoughts for today? Okay.
I just want to really because I know there was a little bit of confusion on the slides. July 9th is our next RAC meeting. July 29th is the public hearing for commission. I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. I don't want to have you all show up on the 6th or on July 23rd. So the 9th and the 29th.
Hopefully accurate on your calendars, even if the slides are misleading. Morgan?
Just a note, that meeting invite somehow showed up in my Teams calendar, but didn't show up in my Outlook calendar. That could be a me problem. So just a point to if other people aren't seeing it showing up on their calendar, check your Teams.
That might be, I don't know how we sent that out, but it might be worth just kind of trying again. I've heard some other folks have some issues with that or not see it on their calendar. So maybe we can just delete the old one and send a new one, just so everybody has the information.
Okay, we'll make sure we'll reconcile all the technical calendar slide misleading information before too long. Okay, at 11:58. I don't see any hands. Still don't see any hands. Appreciate the conversation today. Thank you, everybody. It was robust. Thanks for coming so prepared and speaking so candidly about kind of what's out there and what still needs to be done. So have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you in July. Take care.
Yes, thank you all.
Bye.